The fluorescent lights flickered above as Susan's trembling fingers gripped the steering wheel. Her heart pounded in her ears, replaying the confrontation that had just unfolded in the parking lot. It had started so innocuously. She glanced up from her phone to find a pair of icy eyes glaring at her through the rearview mirror. The other driver, a middle-aged woman with perfectly coiffed hair, had immediately begun gesturing wildly and yelling something unintelligible. Before Susan could react, the woman had flung open her door and stalked over, looming over the driver's side window. "What the hell is your problem?" She spat, spraying spit that landed on Susan's cheek. Completely bewildered, Susan had stammered, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to." "You were staring at me. That's rude and disrespectful," the woman had shrieked. "I should call the police and have you cited for harassment." Susan's mouth had gone dry as the woman's tirade continued, hurling insults and accusations that made no sense. When she finally paused to catch her breath, Susan had desperately tried to de-escalate. "Look, I really didn't mean to offend you. I was just checking my phone and happened to glance up. I'm sorry if I upset you, but there's no need to." "No need," the woman had interrupted, her face twisting in outrage. "You think you can just look at me however you want? I'm going to make sure you learn a lesson." And with that, she had stalked back to her car, peeled out of the parking spot, and sped away, leaving Susan shaken and bewildered. Now, as she sat in her car, replaying the irrational confrontation, a bitter sense of injustice welled up inside her. How dare that woman accuse her of harassment for such a mundane action? The whole situation was absurd. With a resolute sigh, Susan started her car and pulled out of the lot, determined to put the incident behind her. As she merged onto the highway, however, a glint of light in her rearview mirror caught her eye. There, in the distance, was the same car, the one belonging to the enraged woman. Susan's stomach dropped. Was she being followed? The traffic ahead of her was heavy, preventing her from speeding away, and as the car drew closer, her anxiety spiked. Gripping the steering wheel tightly, she scanned her surroundings, searching for an exit or side street where she could lose the other vehicle. But it was too late. The car was pulling up alongside her, the woman's furious face visible through the window. Susan's heart raced as the car edged closer, the woman gesturing wildly. Suddenly, there was a loud thud, and Susan watched in horror as the woman's car swerved dangerously close, scraping the side of her vehicle. Panic flooding her system, Susan knew she had to get away. Ignoring the blaring horns around her, she merged into the next lane, desperate to put distance between herself and the unhinged driver. But the woman's car kept pace, tailgating her aggressively. Susan's mind raced, trying to process the surreal turn of events. What had started as a simple parking lot encounter had escalated into a high-speed chase, with a crazed woman seemingly intent on causing her harm. As the adrenaline coursed through her veins, Susan knew she had to act fast. Her safety was at stake. Heart pounding, Susan scanned the highway desperately, searching for an exit or any safe haven to escape the enraged woman. She gripped the steering wheel tightly, her knuckles turning white as the other car continued to tailgate and swerve menacingly. Suddenly, an idea took hold. Glancing in her rearview mirror, Susan noticed the array of cameras mounted on the back of her car, a feature she had installed after a previous road rage incident. Thinking quickly, she activated the recording system, determined to capture the woman's erratic and aggressive behavior. As the other car drew closer, Susan could see the woman's eyes burning with fury, her mouth twisted into a snarl. Steeling her nerves, she refused to look away, meeting the woman's gaze defiantly through the mirror. The tactic seemed to enrage the woman further, and she began ramming the side of Susan's car, the sickening crunch of metal filling the air. Gritting her teeth, Susan refused to give in to the panic welling up inside her, instead focusing on keeping her car steady and maintaining control. Suddenly, the woman pulled alongside Susan, her window rolling down. "Pull over, you bitch," she screamed, her voice shrill and unhinged. "I'm going to teach you a lesson you'll never forget." Susan's mind raced, weighing her options. She could try to outrun the woman, but the heavy traffic made that risky. Alternatively, she could pull over and try to reason with the unhinged driver. But that seemed equally perilous. In the end, Susan decided to continue driving, determined to reach the nearest police station and report the woman's behavior. As she merged into the next lane, the other car cut her off, nearly causing a collision. Horns blared all around them, and Susan could feel the adrenaline coursing through her veins. Glancing down at the recording system, she saw that it was still running, capturing every second of the harrowing encounter. With renewed determination, Susan continued down the highway, her eyes scanning for any sign of a police presence. The other car remained relentless, its driver screaming obscenities and threats as she continued to ram Susan's vehicle. Susan gritted her teeth, focusing on her driving and trying to maintain her composure, despite the sheer terror coursing through her. As the minutes ticked by, Susan's hope began to fade. The police were nowhere to be seen, and the unhinged woman showed no signs of backing down. Desperate, Susan knew she had to find a way to escape the situation before it escalated further. Susan's heart pounded in her chest as the enraged woman continued to tailgate and ram her car, the relentless assault leaving her nerves frayed. She scanned the highway desperately, searching for any opportunity to escape the volatile situation. Suddenly, an exit ramp came into view, and Susan made a split-second decision. Signaling quickly, she merged into the right lane and took the off-ramp, her stomach clenching as the other car followed closely behind. As she navigated the winding streets, Susan's mind raced, trying to formulate a plan. She needed to lose the woman and get to the police station, but with the erratic driver in pursuit, she couldn't risk leading her directly there. Glancing in the rearview mirror, Susan saw the woman's car gaining ground, its driver's face contorted with rage. Gritting her teeth, she pressed the accelerator, weaving through traffic as she sought an opportunity to shake off her pursuer. Up ahead, Susan spotted a crowded shopping center and made a sharp turn into the parking lot, narrowly avoiding a collision. The sudden maneuver seemed to catch the other driver off guard, and for a moment, Susan felt a glimmer of hope. But the respite was short-lived. As she navigated the maze of cars and pedestrians, the woman's vehicle reappeared in her rearview mirror, closing in rapidly. Susan's heart sank, realizing that she had not managed to lose the relentless driver. Desperate, she searched for an escape route, her eyes darting from one exit to the next. Finally, she spotted a narrow alleyway between two buildings and made a sharp turn, praying that the other car would be unable to follow. The alley was cramped and winding, forcing Susan to slow her speed, but she pressed on, determined to find a safe haven. As she emerged onto a quieter residential street, she let out a shaky breath, momentarily relieved. But the sense of security was fleeting. Glancing in her rearview mirror, she saw the other car appear at the end of the alley, its driver still in pursuit. Susan's hands trembled as she gripped the steering wheel, her mind racing to find a way to evade the unstable woman. She knew she couldn't continue this game of cat and mouse indefinitely. Sooner or later, the woman would catch up, and Susan feared what might happen then. With a growing sense of dread, she realized that she had to find a way to end this confrontation, and quickly. Susan's heart raced as she weaved through the unfamiliar residential streets, the other car still in hot pursuit. She gripped the steering wheel tightly, her knuckles turning white, as she desperately searched for a way to shake off her relentless pursuer. Glancing in the rearview mirror, she caught a glimpse of the woman's vehicle, closing in rapidly. Panic surged through her, and she knew she had to act quickly. Suddenly, an idea took hold. Scanning the area, she spotted a police station just a few blocks ahead. Relief flooded her, and she pressed the accelerator, determined to reach the sanctuary of the station. But as she drew closer, her stomach dropped. The woman's car was gaining ground, and Susan knew she couldn't risk leading the unhinged driver directly to the police. She needed to find another way to throw her off the trail. Thinking fast, Susan made a sharp turn down a narrow side street, her car bumping along the uneven pavement. The other vehicle followed closely, its driver still hurling insults and threats. Susan's mind raced, searching for a solution. She couldn't keep this chase going indefinitely, and she knew that the woman's erratic behavior was only escalating. Glancing around, she spotted a residential neighborhood, the houses lining the streets offering a potential escape. Without hesitation, Susan turned down a quiet side street, her car weaving between the parked vehicles. The other driver seemed momentarily confused, hesitating before following suit. As Susan navigated the maze of narrow roads, she caught glimpses of the woman's car in her rearview mirror, but it was falling behind. Emboldened, she pressed on, making a series of sharp turns and weaving through the neighborhood. Finally, she reached a dead-end street, and her heart sank. Quickly, she scanned the area, looking for any possible escape route. Her eyes landed on a narrow alleyway between two houses, and without hesitation, she steered her car into it, the vehicle barely fitting through the tight space. As she emerged on the other side, she let out a shaky breath, relief washing over her. Glancing in the rearview mirror, she saw no sign of the other car. For now, it seemed, she had managed to elude her pursuer. But Susan knew this respite was only temporary. The woman was still out there, and she needed to find a way to get to the police station and report the incident before the confrontation escalated further. With her heart still pounding, Susan navigated the quiet residential streets, her eyes darting from one rearview mirror to the other. The silence was deafening, and she couldn't shake the feeling that the unhinged woman was still out there, lurking and waiting to strike again. Glancing down at the camera system in her car, Susan saw that the recording was still active, capturing every moment of the harrowing ordeal. She felt a sense of relief, knowing that she had evidence to support her case, but the knowledge did little to ease the lingering fear coursing through her. As she rounded a corner, the familiar silhouette of the police station came into view, and Susan let out a shaky breath. She was almost there, but a nagging doubt crept into her mind. What if the woman was waiting for her, ready to confront her again? Steeling her nerves, Susan pulled into the parking lot, her eyes scanning the area for any sign of the other vehicle. To her relief, the lot was empty, and she quickly parked her car and hurried inside, determined to report the incident before the woman had a chance to catch up. The lobby was surprisingly quiet, and Susan approached the front desk, her voice trembling as she explained the situation to the officer on duty. The officer listened intently, his brow furrowing with concern as Susan described the woman's erratic and aggressive behavior. "That's a very serious situation, ma'am," the officer said, his voice calm and reassuring. "We'll need to take a full report and review the footage from your cameras. Let's get you to a private room where you can give us all the details." Susan followed the officer down a hallway, her mind racing with a mixture of relief and apprehension. As they entered the small, nondescript room, she felt a wave of exhaustion wash over her. The adrenaline that had fueled her escape was starting to fade, leaving her shaken and on edge. The officer gestured for her to have a seat, and Susan sank into the chair, her hands trembling. "I'm just glad I made it here safely," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was so afraid that woman was going to catch up to me, and I don't even want to think about what she might have done." The officer nodded, his expression grave. "We take any reports of road rage and harassment very seriously. You did the right thing by coming here, and we'll do everything we can to ensure your safety." As the officer began to take her statement, Susan felt a sense of relief wash over her. Finally, she was in a safe place, and the authorities were taking her concerns seriously. But deep down, she knew that the confrontation was far from over, and that the unhinged woman was still out there, somewhere, waiting to strike again. As Susan recounted the harrowing details of her encounter with the enraged woman, the police officer listened intently, his brow furrowed with concern. He asked a series of probing questions, carefully documenting every aspect of the incident, and Susan could sense the gravity of the situation. When she finished her statement, the officer turned to the computer, his fingers rapidly typing. "We've got your full report logged, and I've already put out an alert for the vehicle you described," he said, his voice calm and reassuring. "In the meantime, I'd like you to review the footage from your camera system so we can get that as evidence." Susan nodded, grateful for the officer's professionalism and empathy. As she rewatched the recording, her stomach churned at the sight of the woman's erratic and aggressive behavior. The audio captured the woman's frantic screaming and threats, and Susan couldn't help but shudder at the sheer intensity of her rage. "This is definitely a serious case of road rage and harassment," the officer said, his expression grave. "We'll need to get this footage to our detectives and see if we can track down the other driver. In the meantime, I'd advise you to be extremely cautious and avoid any further confrontation with this individual." Susan swallowed hard, her mind racing. "What if she comes after me again?" she asked, her voice laced with fear. "I don't know if I can handle another encounter like that." The officer leaned forward, his eyes unwavering. "We're going to do everything in our power to locate this woman and ensure your safety," he said, his tone reassuring. "In the meantime, I'd suggest you stay in a public place and avoid driving alone if possible. And if you do spot her vehicle again, don't hesitate to call us immediately." Susan nodded, her mind whirling with a mixture of relief and apprehension. She knew that the police were taking the situation seriously, but the thought of the unhinged woman still being out there, lurking and waiting to strike, filled her with a sense of dread. As the officer stepped out to confer with his colleagues, Susan sat in the quiet room, her fingers drumming nervously on the table. She had done the right thing by coming to the police station, but she couldn't shake the feeling that the confrontation was far from over. With a deep breath, she steeled her nerves, determined to see this through. She had evidence, and the authorities were on her side. But as she waited for the officer to return, she couldn't help but wonder what the unpredictable woman might do next. As Susan waited anxiously in the small police station room, the officer returned, his expression grave. "We've reviewed the footage from your cameras and have issued an all-points bulletin for the vehicle and driver you described," he said, his voice low and serious. "This is a serious case of road rage and harassment, and we're treating it as such." Susan felt a wave of relief wash over her, but it was tempered by a lingering sense of unease. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Well, we're going to do everything we can to locate the other driver and bring her in for questioning," the officer explained. "In the meantime, I'd strongly advise you to be extremely cautious and avoid any further interaction with this individual. She's clearly unstable and potentially dangerous." Susan nodded, her mind racing with thoughts of the woman's unhinged behavior. "I'm just worried that she's going to come after me again," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The officer leaned forward, his expression earnest. "We understand your concern, ma'am, and we're taking it very seriously. We've got officers monitoring the area, and we'll do our best to keep you safe. But in the meantime, I'd suggest you stay in a public place, avoid driving alone if possible, and keep your camera system running at all times." Susan let out a shaky breath, her hands trembling slightly. "Okay, I'll do that," she said, her resolve strengthening. "I just want this to be over, you know. I can't believe this is happening to me." The officer nodded sympathetically. "I know it's a lot to deal with, but you're doing the right thing by coming forward. We're going to do everything we can to resolve this situation and ensure your safety." As the officer stepped out to continue his investigation, Susan sat alone in the room, her mind racing with a million thoughts. She couldn't shake the feeling that the woman was still out there, plotting her next move. But she was determined to see this through, no matter what. Steeling her nerves, Susan stood up and made her way out of the police station, her eyes scanning the parking lot for any sign of the other vehicle. As she slid behind the wheel of her car, she couldn't help but feel a sense of dread, knowing that the confrontation was far from over. As Susan drove away from the police station, Her mind was consumed by a whirlwind of emotions. Relief at having reported the incident and filed an official complaint, but also a lingering sense of unease and trepidation. She knew the authorities were taking the matter seriously, but the thought of the unhinged woman still being out there, unpredictable and potentially dangerous, filled her with a deep sense of dread. She gripped the steering wheel tightly, her knuckles turning white, as she scanned the road ahead for any sign of the other vehicle. Determined to avoid any further confrontation, Susan decided to take a different route home, one that avoided the main roads and brought her through a quieter, more residential area. The drive was longer, but she felt a sense of security in the familiar surroundings. As she turned onto her street, however, her heart leaped into her throat. There, parked haphazardly in front of her house, was the unmistakable car of the woman who had terrorized her earlier. Susan's stomach twisted with dread, and she felt her hands tremble as she pulled into her driveway, parking a safe distance away. Steeling her nerves, Susan decided to confront the situation head-on. She emerged from her car, her gaze fixed on the other vehicle, and approached it cautiously. As she drew closer, she could see the woman sitting behind the wheel, her expression a mix of fury and triumph. "What are you doing here?" Susan demanded, her voice shaking slightly despite her best efforts to appear confident. The woman sneered, her eyes narrowing. "Oh, I'm just making sure you learn your lesson, you little bitch," she spat. "You thought you could just report me and get away with it, didn't you?" Susan felt her heart pounding in her chest, but she refused to back down. "The police are already involved, and they're taking this very seriously," she said, her voice growing stronger. "I have evidence of your harassment, and they're going to make sure you face the consequences." The woman's face contorted with rage, and she lunged forward, grabbing Susan's arm with a vice-like grip. "You think the police can protect you?" she hissed. "I'm going to make your life a living hell, and there's nothing you can do about it." Susan's eyes widened with fear, but she refused to let the woman see her cower. Instead, she met her gaze defiantly, her voice steady. "I'm not afraid of you," she said, her words belying the tremor in her voice. "I'm going to keep fighting, and I won't stop until you're held accountable for your actions." The woman's grip tightened, and Susan winced in pain, but she refused to back down. They stood there, locked in a battle of wills, each refusing to yield to the other. In the end, it was the woman who blinked first, her eyes narrowing with frustration. She released Susan's arm and stormed back to her car, peeling out of the driveway with a screech of tires. Susan watched her go, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew the confrontation was far from over, but in that moment, she felt a surge of triumph. She had stood her ground, and she was determined to continue the fight, no matter what the consequences. As she made her way into her house, Susan couldn't help but feel a sense of resolve. This was a battle she was determined to win, no matter the cost. She would not be intimidated, and she would not back down. The road ahead might be long and arduous, but she was ready to face it head-on.